The ship floated in the silent abyss, its lights flickering against the backdrop of endless darkness. Captain Voss sat in the command chair, staring at the control panel. Every system was failing, one by one. First, the long-range communications had gone dark. Then, the engines sputtered to a halt, leaving the ship adrift. Now, even life support was showing signs of decay. It had all happened so quickly, without any warning, as if some unseen force had reached into the heart of the vessel and begun pulling it apart, piece by piece. The crew moved frantically around him, their voices hushed but frantic. They whispered theories, each one more unsettling than the last. A malfunction, a sabotage, or something far worse. No one dared to say the final possibility aloud, but it lingered in the air like a ghost. They were in the Andromeda Expanse, a region of space only partially mapped, filled with anomalies and mysteries no human had yet unraveled. Strange things had been reported here before: ships disappearing, signals lost in the void, transmissions picked up with voices that didn't belong to anyone. Then, the message arrived. It didn't come through the normal channels. There was no alert, no sound to indicate an incoming transmission. Instead, the words simply appeared on the main screen, stark against the black background. 3 steps. 3 simple instructions, written in perfect, unfeeling clarity. Open the airlock. Take 3 steps forward. Close the door. At first, no one spoke. The message felt wrong, unnatural, like something that shouldn't exist. Voss felt his chest tighten. The ship's systems were barely holding on, but somehow, this message had found its way into their interface. He didn't believe in ghosts, but this was something else entirely. It wasn't a command, nor was it a request. It was a test. Mara, his lieutenant, broke the silence. "This is a joke," right? Her voice wavered slightly, betraying the fear she tried to suppress. "Someone hacked into the system." Quinn, the first officer, shook his head. "No. There's no signal. No transmission logs. It just appeared." Voss leaned forward, examining the screen as if the words would shift or change under his scrutiny. But they remained, solid and unyielding. 3 instructions. Open the airlock. Take 3 steps forward. Close the door. His mind raced. If it was some kind of trick, it was an elaborate one. If it was a warning, then the intent behind it was something beyond human comprehension. He looked at the crew, their eyes filled with barely contained panic. They needed him to be decisive, to be their anchor. So he made a choice. "We follow the instructions." The room erupted in protest. Mara was the first to stand. "Are you serious? Open the airlock in the middle of dead space? That's suicide." Quinn's expression darkened. "We don't even know where this message came from." Voss raised a hand, silencing them. "We don't know what's happening to this ship, either. We've lost control of almost everything. But this message came through when nothing else could. That means something." He exhaled slowly. "If we do nothing, we drift here until the ship dies around us. If we follow this, maybe we find answers." No one wanted to admit it, but they all knew he was right. Fear was tangible in the room, but there was something else, too. A strange sense of inevitability. As if this moment had already been decided long before they ever stepped foot on this vessel. Voss stood. "I'll do it." Mara grabbed his arm. "Captain, you don't have to." "Yes. I do." She hesitated but let go. The rest of the crew didn't argue. Not because they agreed, but because there was nothing left to say. Voss walked through the ship with slow, deliberate steps. He felt the pulse of the vessel, the hum of its failing systems, the dim emergency lights casting eerie shadows against the walls. He reached the airlock chamber and stood before it. The reinforced door was thick, built to withstand the void of space. Beyond it, there was nothing but the unknown. His fingers hovered over the control panel. One button. One press. That was all it took. He inhaled. Exhaled. Then, he opened the airlock. A sharp hiss filled the chamber as the pressurized air inside the ship met the vacuum outside. The warning alarms blared, flashing red, but Voss didn't move. He watched as the door slowly slid open, revealing the endless expanse of black beyond. Something was waiting. It wasn't a ship, nor was it an asteroid or debris. It wasn't even a living thing, at least, not in any form Voss recognized. It was a presence, a shadow against the void, shifting and moving without shape. It pulsed, like a heartbeat that had no body. It had no eyes, no features, but he knew, without question, that it was watching him. His instincts screamed at him to step back, to close the door and run. But he had already taken the first step. The airlock was open. There was no turning back now. His breathing was steady, but his hands clenched into fists. This was it. The moment where everything changed. He took a step forward. Voss stood at the threshold, staring into the endless void. The airlock was open now, its reinforced doors parted to expose the ship's fragile interior to the silent abyss beyond. The alarms had fallen silent, leaving only the faint hum of failing systems in his ears. The crew's voices were distant, blurred by the weight of his decision. The message had told him to take 3 steps forward, and he had already taken the first. There was no going back. His boot hovered over the threshold, and he hesitated. The shadow outside remained still, yet it felt alive, aware. It pulsed in a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if waiting for him to make his next move. His mind rebelled against the command. Every rational part of him screamed that this was wrong, that stepping into open space without a tether, without a suit, without anything to protect him, was suicide. But then, something strange happened. As he stood there, on the precipice of the unknown, the space beyond the airlock did not behave as it should. It was not the cold, airless void he expected. There was no sudden loss of pressure, no violent rush of escaping oxygen. The shadow beyond the ship's edge did not remain empty darkness. It shifted, stretched, and for a moment, Voss thought he could see something through it. Not just blackness, but depth. Movement. A world beyond. His heart pounded. Was this a trick, a hallucination, some kind of gravitational anomaly bending the laws of physics he didn't know? All he knew was that the first step had not killed him, and now the second loomed before him like an invitation to something he could not yet understand. His muscles tensed, and he forced his foot forward. The second step. The moment his boot touched the edge of the airlock, the ship vanished. Or rather, it changed. 1 second, he had been standing in the artificial light of the chamber, surrounded by steel walls and control panels, the hum of life support systems failing in the background. In the next instant, all of it was gone. The ship had been replaced by something else entirely. The first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the silence of deep space, but a deeper, more absolute stillness. It was the absence of sound, of vibration, of anything familiar. His breath caught in his throat. He wasn't floating, he was standing. on something solid. But when he looked down, there was nothing beneath him. No floor, no surface, just a vast expanse of black stretching endlessly in all directions. He turned slowly, his movements deliberate, testing the reality of this place. The ship was no longer there. The airlock. The walls. The crew. Everything was gone. Yet he was still breathing. The shadow was there, though. And now, it was closer. It surrounded him, but it did not touch him. It shifted and coiled like a living thing, yet there was no shape, no form to it. Just movement. Just presence. It was watching. Waiting. Voss took another breath, steadying himself. He clenched his fists, grounding himself in the only certainty he had left, himself. The message had told him to take 3 steps. He had taken 2. Whatever this was, it was not over yet. The space around him began to change. The blackness rippled, and suddenly, images formed within it. Not static images, but moving, shifting scenes like memories unfolding before his eyes. He saw flashes of light, swirling nebulae, vast cosmic structures that should have been millions of light years away but were now impossibly close. Then the images changed, becoming something more familiar. He saw his own ship, the Osiris, before the systems failed, before the message arrived. He saw himself, standing on the bridge, giving orders. The crew, moving about, unaware that something was already watching them. Then the images shifted again, showing him things he could not remember. Things that had not happened. He saw himself standing in this very place again and again taking the same steps. He saw himself speaking words he had not yet spoken, making choices he had not yet made. A cold realization settled over him. This wasn't the first time. He had been here before. Somehow, some way, this moment had happened before. And it would happen again. The shadow pulsed, and for the first time, he heard something. Not a voice, not exactly, but an understanding. A thought that was not his own. "You have always been here." Voss shuddered. His instincts screamed to turn back, to flee, but there was nowhere to run. The ship was gone. The only way forward was the 3rd step. He clenched his jaw. He had come this far. Whatever this was, whatever force had drawn him here, he would see it through to the end. His foot hovered over the unseen surface. The 3rd step awaited. Voss hesitated. The 3rd step. The final instruction. He stood at the edge of something vast and incomprehensible, surrounded by a shifting void that pulsed as though it were alive. The shadow did not move closer, but he could feel it watching, waiting. There was no ship behind him anymore. No crew. No escape. There was only the next step. His breath was steady, controlled, but inside, his mind raced. He had seen glimpses of something beyond understanding, visions of himself, of moments that had happened before and would happen again. A cycle, repeating endlessly. Was he trapped in some kind of loop? Had he done this before, only to forget and begin again? Or was time itself unraveling around him, his fingers curled into fists? None of it mattered anymore. There was only the choice before him. He could refuse, remain standing in this nowhere place, lost forever in the emptiness. Or he could step forward, into the unknown. Voss exhaled slowly, then moved. The 3rd step. The universe broke. It was not an explosion, not a sound, not even movement. It was simply the unraveling of reality itself. The blackness around him fractured, splitting like glass struck by an unseen force. Cracks spread outward, revealing glimpses of something beyond, something far greater than his mind could comprehend. Through the cracks, he saw worlds, not just planets, but entire galaxies, sprawling like veins of light across an infinite tapestry. He saw ancient structures, suspended in nothingness, vast and endless, as if built by hands that had long since faded from existence. He saw figures, beings of shifting energy and impossible form, watching him as though he were the anomaly, the intruder in a place he was never meant to be. Then the shadow moved. It flowed, folding in on itself, taking form, not a true shape, but something more solid than before. And then, for the first time, it spoke. Not in words, not in sound, but in pure understanding, a thought pressed into his mind like a brand upon his soul. You have arrived. Voss felt his knees weaken. The force of it was overwhelming, too vast to grasp. He wanted to ask questions, to demand answers, but the words stuck in his throat. He was nothing here, a mere fragment of existence, standing before something eternal. The shadow pulsed again. You were chosen. You have always been chosen. He shook his head. I don't understand, he managed, his voice barely more than a whisper. The fractures in the void widened. Light poured through, bathing him in something warm and terrifying all at once. A feeling spread through him, recognition. As if some forgotten part of him, buried deep within, had always known this moment would come. Memories surfaced. Not his own, but echoes of something far older. A journey taken countless times. A test, repeated through ages uncounted. He was not the first. He would not be the last. But this time, something was different. This time, he had reached the third step. The shadow loomed before him, vast beyond measure. Step forward. It was not a command. It was an invitation. Voss swallowed hard, then took another breath. And then he stepped. Light consumed him. A rushing sensation filled his body, as if he were moving at impossible speed, yet standing perfectly still. His mind expanded, stretched beyond its limits, filling with knowledge he could not yet grasp. He saw not with his eyes, but with something deeper. The truth. The universe was not what he had believed it to be. Reality itself was a construct, a thin layer atop something far more complex. He saw the threads of existence, the connections between worlds, between people, between time itself. And at the heart of it all was the source, a place beyond space, beyond matter, beyond even thought. A place he had now reached. The void around him shifted, and suddenly, he was no longer alone. Figures emerged from the light, stepping forward from unseen places. They were like him, yet different, some human, some not, all with the same look of recognition in their eyes. They had taken the steps before him. They had reached this place. One of them, a tall figure wrapped in flowing energy, raised a hand. Welcome home, child of stars. And then, everything began.